Watershed District, March 22nd, 2018. All managers are present except Manager Shackleton, who has stepped away momentarily. I see no members of the public, so we'll go to item 3, approval of the agenda.
Move approval.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Our first information item this evening is an introduction of herself by Kathy Reynolds.
I think I've had a chance to meet most of you a little bit earlier this evening. I am Kathy Reynolds. I'm the new operations manager here for the district. I come here most recently from Florida, but my background is I'm an attorney. I've been in the Marine Corps for several years and still in the reserves. And I have a background in doing a lot of operations management in addition to the legal and a lot of business process improvements. So I'm looking forward to digging in and see how I can help out and do the work here in the districts.
Thank you and welcome. Appreciate it.
Nice to meet you.
Also, for information items, there is in our packet a response letter from Board of Water and Soil Resources to the letter we had sent about the watershed-based funding pilot program. On the consent agenda is approval of the minutes of March 8th, which I want to remove to action item. Approval of the check register, general checking account, surety account, 325 Blake Road checking account. And also Resolution 18-023, authorization to award a contract for the 2018 stormwater pond sediment surveys. And Resolution 18-024, authorization to submit a partnership proposal with Great River Grading to apply for an LCCMR grant. With the removal of the minutes, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. If I don't make a note, I know that I'll forget to do the minutes here when I get to action items. By way of President's report, I have a lot of dates to rattle off, I think. The Joint Working Group for 325 Blake Road meeting the first week of April. Mr. Heyman has coordinated that. On April 11th, there's a CAC meeting, and I'm the assigned manager for that night. At our meeting on April 12th, Commissioner Callison will come for her annual face-to-face report with us. And on April 17th is the Metro Mod meeting. So Manager Becker and any other managers who want to attend certainly can be there. I would anticipate that when they give state reports, we'll hear something from Board of Water and Soil Resources about the watershed-based funding pilot program. So if there's something, we can report back on that. That is all I have. Manager Miller, Planning and Policy Committee report.
We met earlier tonight and had an extensive discussion about strategic planning and planning process and accountability, and it's an ongoing development that we will be bringing to the board when we've completed the discussion. There was a lot of feedback from the board, and the staff was going to respond to that in a timely fashion, which they always do.
Oh, of course.
So it's going to be interesting realignment of our reporting system.
Thank you. Manager Rognes, Citizens Advisory Committee meeting.
Yes. Unfortunately, I was not able to be at that meeting a week ago, last Wednesday. But I did flag down Darren Lochner, who took some notes that were useful, I think. The main focus of the CAC meeting last Wednesday was the overview of the MCWD Watershed Management Plan and discussion on implementation. Renee Clark was primarily tasked with that review, and they also did some brainstorming focused on implementation of watershed management plan for prospective coming from developers, builders, realtors, and that sort of thing, which kind of tied into some of the things we were talking about at the committee meeting this afternoon. We had some discussions about metrics and how we might be measuring some of our progress against the mission, vision, values, and review of our approach to running this particular watershed. And one of the things that occurred to me that we might have been perhaps tied into this discussion was the idea of going back to the 14 communities that witnessed a change in our operating philosophy, and but also just going back and creating some feedback from the developer, builders, and realtors that are affected by our approach to water and land planning. I think that's probably in a capsule about all of that I would have to report tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other events or meetings managers want to report on? Manager Miller?
I don't have a meeting to report on, but just a little follow-up about the auditing our various constituents on whether they do see a change in our approach, and is it meaningful and helpful? That would be interesting. Thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah, the one thing that they addressed was skepticism of developers. You know, to weigh in and try to get us as part of the process of building a successful project. And you know, relying on a watershed as being a strong member of the team is just not understood, I think, among the MAUD membership, which is, the MAUD membership really seems like it deals more with making rules and making people adhere to those rules. And I think that our approach really kind of changed the paradigm, perhaps. And so, like Dick said, we probably have some public relations to do with the private developer and builders and realtors.
Thank you. Upcoming meetings and event schedule is listed in the agenda. We have, going to item 9.1, Mr. Mark Gibbs from WedPath here to review the 2017 audit report.
Good evening. Thanks for the opportunity to just run through this report with you briefly. We completed the audit of the district for the end of December 31st, 17. You have these books here. I have been through the audit results with your management team last week, and then also So I guess I'm looking for a little guidance here. I'm assuming you want the abbreviated version tonight in front of the board.
I don't think you're willing to have a abbreviated version.
You want the full?
Let's-
Well,
I'll take
I don't know, I'll probably have to, I'll read it at some
I'll-
point. So
yeah,
you don't
I'll take
need
it.
to read it aloud to me or
Well, my
anything.
response is what you gave to us, I
That's
think
right,
might
you
actually
did that. Okay, I'll do that.
Sure.
suffice, which was,
So, page 7, I mean, is what is our audit opinion. And I'd just like to take you through that a little bit. If you go down on page 7 to the 4th paragraph, that describes what the audit procedures are, what we do. We come in, we perform tests on your internal controls, the objective of the audit is to gain evidential matter that will support your financial statements as they are approved material in the statement. And that's what we do through a variety of testing, like comparing the budget, compliance testing with the state of Minnesota, legal compliance audit guide, and then internal controls, as well as all other approval processes. If you, on page 8, the kind of the meat of the opinion is the first paragraph on page 8, where we state that in our opinion, the financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial statements of the district, and each major fund type, and I'll kind of walk through the fund types as we go through the rest of the report. This is the most desirable opinion, and then the information after that, the required supplementary information, is letting you know what we do with the testing that we do on other funds and all of your management planning funds, your programs, policies, the conservation program, and we test that, and that's in the back of the report, the required supplementary information. Probably just a couple of key statements I'd like to walk through, and I'd be glad to answer any questions if anybody has any. If we want to go to page 12, page 12 is the statement of net position, or the balance sheet, if you will, of the district. And what this is a snapshot of the district's finances and capital assets and other financial instruments as of December 31st. So it's like the balance on that date. I'll just take you through the key items. And we have the balances at December 17 and then December of 16, so you can compare. The cash and investments, the amount that you see there is you only get your tax deposits in twice a year, once in December, once in June. So you have, as of December, you're going to be spending down much of part of that money in your budget throughout until you receive your second half payment in June. So that's why that balance is higher at year end and December always. Under the mortgage receivable, that's the sale of the shoot property, which is something that's a long-term mortgage receivable the district is receiving payment on. If you go down to the $850,000 item that is there on page, that is new this year. That's the land held for resale. That's the Victoria property that you're selling back to the city. Since you're selling it in less than 1 year from your purchase, we pull it out of the capital assets and call it a land held for resale. And then the capital assets that you see, the large numbers there, the $2 million is your depreciable assets. The $30 million is your non-depreciable assets, which consists of land, easements, and other property improvements that we do not depreciate. Under the liabilities, about the fourth line down, we have unearned revenue of $546,000. What that consists of is FEMA grants and Minnesota Clean Water grant, where the money has been granted to you, but you have not spent it yet. My understanding is you'll be spending it in 2018, and then we'll recognize the revenue at that point. If you want to go farther down under the loans payable, the reason that looks a little different, we have $10 million due in 1 year and $12 million due in more than a year. Last year, those numbers were skewed differently. That's because you have a $10 million balloon payment due on the cold storage property, which I understand you're renegotiating now. And at the bottom, under the net position, the net investment in capital assets, that's your capital assets less the debt that you owe on those. That's what the $9 million is. The $11 million is unrestricted fund balance, and when I say unrestricted, that doesn't mean it is designated. You have management has made plans to spend that money or those funds, but since it's not restricted by a third party, the accounting standards require us to call that unrestricted fund balance. So that's kind of the snapshot of your finances at December 31st of 17. And if you could skip ahead to page 38, what that page 38 shows the actual operations for the year of your management planning funds. That's all your funds together. And then this is a summary page, and I want to point out here that the district does prepares a budget in August. It's submitted to the counties in September and then ratified in December. You can see that your final budget and your 2017 actual amounts are pretty close. We have the district has a good budget process where the revenues are the only thing that's really off here is your rental income, and that's because you don't budget the rental income because it's offset by the rental expense in the cold storage area. Your property taxes came in within budget parameters. On the expenditure side, you had 13 million budgeted. You ended up spending about 11 million too. A couple of the ones that are where there was some underage is in project implementation, and the reason for that is because a project may be intended to start last year but doesn't get there because maybe weather related, or you don't get permits approved, or a contract doesn't happen. But at any rate, your overall budget is within 90% of the actual, and so one of the things we look at is your budget process, which we believe is solid. So that's kind of a summary of those, of all the funds together. And then the required supplementary information, if you had questions on specific funds. This starts on page 44, and really we have the revenue and expenditures for all of the different funds, so that includes your management planning fund, your policy and operations, and then also the programs, which are the 2,000 accounts, and the permits, and then in the 3,000 accounts are your actual construction projects, or district projects, I should say. And then the 4,000 is your, and then all the way up to the 6,000 on page 51 is where you report the cold storage method income and also the expenditures related to the cold storage program. So the pages 44 through 51 here is a series of all your accounts that are rolled up in total on page 38 that I went through earlier. And kind of continuing to the back, we also on page 56 and 57 we have a listing of your land conservation, cold storage, scheduled expenditures and accounts. It shows the land that's been purchased and expenditures by each one. This isn't an audited statement, it's really a management tool to help you track all the land and the expenditures related to that in those funds. And at the back of the report, on page 61, we have a report on internal control that we give and go through with the district. This year we had two kind of minor findings. One was related to a reclassification we made for the land held for resale, but I discussed earlier. We moved that out of an expenditure onto the balance sheet, and then we'll relieve that when the land is sold in 2018. And then on page 64, we did test and administer timesheets. Take 27 employees. There were 11 instances where there wasn't a signature of approval from the supervisor. It doesn't mean the supervisor didn't approve it, it just wasn't signed. And so we're recommending that you adhere to the district policy on that. And the district has filled in a response on that, and our state's making changes for that. Other than that, we have a report on Minnesota legal compliance on page 65, where we test for Minnesota laws for contracting and bidding. You have to follow the same laws as the Minnesota municipalities do. Contracting and bidding, conflicts of interest, deposits and investments. Those are the areas that we look at. And the testing that we do at the state of Minnesota provides about a 60-page checklist for that. We test those items. We test specific items in there. We did not have any findings. And then finally, at the end, we have communication with those charged with governance, which is you. And this is kind of a letter to those charged with governance that tells you what we did during the audit. We did not have any disagreements with management. We didn't have any difficulties in performing the audit. The district was ready when it came out and did the audit. And that's kind of the crux of the report. I'd be glad to take questions, or if you don't think of them tonight, you can certainly email me. I'd be glad to answer any questions I could regarding the report. It's a good process. The district has good controls in place in terms of budgeting, in terms of disbursements, and in terms of coding checks and having a third party reconcile them and bring them to the Board of Managers before they're approved. So we feel that the district has proper controls in place for disbursement of the municipal finances.
Thank you for your report. Are there questions for Mr. Gibbs? Manager Becker?
Mr. Gibbs, you said that we had to follow the state contracting laws for municipalities, and you tested a number of contracts against those policies. How did you select the contracts that you tested?
Typically, it's a random, like we read through the minutes and we pick certain ones out based on, we pick certain months throughout the year where we know there are more testing, and we probably tested 2 or 4.
And is there any judgment as to the type of contract?
We try to select larger contracts with a dollar amount that was higher.
And how many contracts do we enter into a year?
With projects, I don't know off the top of my head, so.
Contracts that would be covered by this state law?
Well, anything that where you hire a contractor to do work on like a environmental thing.
So we don't know whether 4 is 1% or?
Well, I'll tell you what, why don't I'll get it for you and send it to you. I'm not, off the top of my head, I can't tell you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll do it.
Thank you, Manager
Real
Becker.
property change contract, Manager Becker, 20 a year?
Well, in terms of actual bid processes that we run in a year?
No, but any contract would fit under the municipal contracting law. Not all of them would require bidding under the municipal contracting law, so there are smaller projects. I'd be guessing, but at, 20 to 30, I'm guessing.
I was just wondering, violation may be a rare event, and sampling for rare events is an extremely difficult thing to do. And I was wondering if that was the situation we were in. And you would use a judgmental sample if you were in that situation, as opposed to a random sample.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Assuming that violation of the state laws is a rare event, which I think it is,
Okay.
sampling for rare events is difficult to do. A random sample generally doesn't turn up the rare events in the sample. So what the researcher does is does a judgmental sample, where they look at the type of contract, say a sole source contract, and evaluate whether that was properly done under the state laws.
I can look into that. I don't know if we use judgmental sample. That's not the term we use in the accounting standard. We don't use judgmental as a term, but maybe I'm not understanding. Like, I think I understand what you're saying, but I don't know if we're making a judgmental sample. Is what I'm trying to say.
Or you might supplement the random sample with a judgmental
Could do
sample.
that, yes. Could do that future years, for sure.
Why don't you discuss it with your fellow auditors?
Other questions? Mr. Gibbs?
Quick question.
Manager Loftus?
Is your company the company who does our accounting?
Yes, different people. So the Nancy Martinson comes out and does the monthly accounting. What she can't do is make management decisions.
Right.
So she reviews so the department heads code checks and the revenues and put them in the project. She's going to check them against your budget and she's going to review the bills. But what we can't do is make management decisions involving your budget, or we couldn't come out and just code your checks for you. If we did that, we would lose our independence.
That was my question, is how do you maintain independence in order to do the audit as well as
So
performing?
in the audit, we have a checklist that is used to determine any any other work we do outside of audit work to make sure that we're not violating our independence for that. And if that, examples would be what I gave, or, for example, if we had to do the payroll calculation for you because you didn't do it, or if there was anything where we.
So coding of bills, payroll.
Coding of bills is done by you.
Management
and we review it.
decisions.
Management decisions we can't do, so we could review your budget and help you with it and review the Excel document and all that, but we can't do the actual budget for you, or if we did, we would lose our independence.
And then, we haven't, or I haven't seen a clear fourth quarter, how did we end up for 2017? And gives me a little picture of that, but I don't have the budget numbers to compare it to. And that might be a question for your other arm,
Yeah,
to say, you know, did we end up at 101% of revenue and 98% of expenses, or, you know, how did we end up as far as
I
our
could
actual?
get that for you. What Nancy prepares on a month, she prepares a monthly schedule of expenditures and revenues coming in and compared to budget. So I can provide that.
Yeah, it never has percentages or anything though. I mean, it's all,
Okay.
yeah.
So you're getting that fund balance report from Ms. Martinson, but it doesn't have the percentage?
There's never an overall comparison.
But you are getting that report
I get a separate email
Great.
from Nancy
with,
Martinson?
it's just a month. It's
Okay.
not a comparison to year, it's not a quarterly, it's not
Okay.
a comparison
It is monthly,
percentage wise.
you're correct.
Yeah.
And it's not, it doesn't do quarterly, it's monthly. I mean, we could change it to quarterly, but originally it was requested to have it monthly, that's right.
No, I think it's fine that it's monthly, but it's not comparing anything. It's not comparing itself to,
Okay.
you know, it doesn't, I guess I should probably ask that leg of your company, not you, as the auditor. Because you're more comparing actuals and
Right.
balance sheets, so I will save that question
But
for
we could
another time.
add, Nancy could add a percentage, you know, budget, a quarterly percentage or a monthly percentage to it, if that's what you'd like to see. That report could be adjusted, I'm sure.
Because this tells me our fund balance, but I don't know exactly, you know, what came in under budget or over budget, or how we contributed to that, in what ways and why.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
that might not be in your arena, so.
Okay, I think we could provide information for you on that
Okay,
in the monthly process.
thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much, Mr. Gibbs.
Thank you. I think you usually would have a motion to approve it.
I don't think
Don't
we're
we
ready
just
to.
accept? We don't approve.
Yeah, this is draft still.
Okay.
No, but normally at this meeting,
Financial reporting is due until 120 days, or 190 days after. And the managers just got it tonight, so
okay,
we're gonna have time to review.
Normally you approve at this meeting, but if you don't want to, it's fine. I think you had told us you wanted it issued by March 30th.
You know, I can't remember that we approved it. I thought we just accepted it.
And approved it later?
No, we just
We don't
accepted
approve, we
it.
just accept it, don't we? I don't think we ever approve it.
Right.
Oh, okay. Maybe I would turn around.
We're not accepting it tonight. Till we review it?
So you didn't receive hard copy, you didn't receive email of this first?
No.
No.
Because we sent it out on March 13th.
This is the first
To
we've ever
James
seen
and
it.
Teresa.
This is the first we've seen it.
Didn't get to the board.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was supposed to, I mean, because we sent it out with email to them. My understanding was that we're going to send it to the board.
So it could be as of March 31st, we could approve it at the first meeting of April, or not approve it, but accept it.
Okay.
Managers, I don't want us to miss a deadline, but I also don't want the managers to be uncomfortable with approving something they haven't had a chance to
I think
review.
you're correct. I don't think it's due till
Yeah, I think
20 days.
I think that's right.
But I think you had told us you wanted it issued by March 30th, so we were trying to get it done. But it's no problem.
We've got an obligation, I don't know if you mentioned it already, is that what, 120 days, We have an obligation to the,
Report to the state.
to the banks too, because it's got to be a fresh audit. For,
When do we have to report the
I don't
banks?
know.
I mean, can we table this
I
till
can
next?
find out and call you tomorrow. I don't know if I thought that March 30th was your rolling deadline, and the state deadline was April 30th, but whatever you need, we can get done.
I can table this to the next board meeting and advance it that way.
Move to
I
table?
mean,
Table the discussion.
There's nothing to table,
There's
there's no
nothing to
motion,
table.
but
there's nothing to
I meant to
table.
add discussion to the phrase, I apologize.
Well, we'll just forward it to the next meeting agenda, which is April 12th. Bring it back. Mr. Welch?
Madam President, I can confirm the time frame for you before the end of this meeting, but I know it's not 90 days from the end of the year.
Okay, and can you let us know if we need to have it for the banks before
I can
April
find
12th?
that out as well. I can contact
Yeah,
them.
would you?
Yeah.
Because I don't have,
Okay. All right, then we, thank you very much, we'll bring this back on
Thank
April
you for
12th.
the opportunity to be of service.
Thank you.
Good night.
You too, please.
Item 11.1, Resolution 18-025, authorization to release request for qualification and professional services. Kathy Reynolds.
Chair White, members of the board, managers, this resolution is really in keeping with some of the questions you were just asking before. Under statutory guidelines, the watershed districts are required to issue RFQs for professional services every 2 years, or at least every 2 years. And our professional services contracts are coming due, and it's time for us to take the next step and issue the RFQs, request for qualifications at this time. So this is a request for the board to authorize us to release the request for qualifications. It is for engineering contracts, our accounting, legal services, government relations, our lobbyist that is doing some work for us, and the information technology, so IT services. I did, with the packet that went out, I did receive one question from Manager Loftus in regards to the accounting contract and the accounting RFQ, asking if we could insert a line into that request for qualification, asking for quarterly updates to the board. So I do have a draft of that changed from what you have in your current package, that if you want that included into the request for qualifications, we can do that and put that in the amendment.
Thank you. May I have a motion to approve the
Move approval.
resolution?
Second.
And do you want to amend? Do we need a motion to amend for that language?
If the managers concur the Ms. Reynolds' report includes that recommendation, everybody's
Yeah,
okay with that?
everything's
Okay,
fine.
great.
Okay.
I got a question.
I'm sorry, I've forgotten where I am. Was there a motion?
Yeah.
was.
And a second.
And
Okay,
second.
great. Go ahead then.
Discussion.
I remember sending out a request for proposals and and picking the attorney, the engineer, and the auditor. Okay. I don't remember ever sending out a request and picking an IT consultant. Is that new?
Mr. Welch?
Madam Chair and Manager Miller, no, the statutory language is kind of broad. It states technical services. So it's been an ongoing practice of ours to apply that rather broadly, given that the requirement under the statute is just to solicit letters of interest. So, but it isn't specific to legal engineering. It's technical services.
Well, I signed at least 6 checks for IT stuff tonight. I have no idea what services they're providing, not because they're not clear, it's just I have no idea how all this stuff fits together. So it seems, we haven't sent out requests for all these different cloud services and maps and all these other consulting services, nor have we hired someone to develop our IT plan and implementation plan and budget. Have we done that already? I don't believe we have.
Ms. Reynolds?
Manager Miller, no, at this point in time, there's not been to my knowledge, a contract or a
Right.
request for qualifications for those types of items. These are the standard ones that, looking through some historical records, we have historically gone out on these items. Some of the smaller, more detailed level ones, when you just start looking at the professional services language, it's a matter of how much does this require us to do the request for qualifications for, and at what level do we not need to do them. The watershed, the language that controls and goes for the watershed districts allows us to, these are the ones that it calls out only the professional services.
Well, we don't know what professional services we're going to require from IT yet, do we? We haven't got a work plan or anything else. We got a consultant to help us develop it, I think, but we don't have a consultant to implement it. Or
I'm going to look to Mr. Welch and then Ms. Reynolds if she has an answer.
Unless you'd like to take the first swing at it.
I can take the first swing here. We currently we're working with the IT contractor, and this is really for the managed services, so this is more of the technical day-to-day managed services. The contract we have in place currently with this company does provide for them to do some basic consulting type work with us, and we may have to look at it whether we use that under this contract or for developing of this overarching IT plan, a kind of strategic plan, whether we look to go to another external source and doing something different. But this, the information technology managed services is really our day-to-day technology upkeep in helping us maintain our systems and our server.
well, if I can.
Let me, did you want to add anything
I
to
can
that?
certainly defer to Manager Miller's question.
Manager Miller?
Well, the engineer, the attorney,
Auditor,
and the auditor,
Accountant.
accountant.
auditor and accountant, are regular services that we need to operate. And we, know what to expect. IT, we have no idea what, sending out an RFQ for IT at this point, I think is way premature. I mean, we haven't got any idea what,
Is this the first time we'd be sending?
yeah, we've never done this before.
We've never done that.
Not on IT, no.
Is that accurate?
In looking through the historical records, and what I found, we have done this in the past. It has been part of the packages that we have sent out for our request for qualifications, has been for the managed services. And as I said, this request for qualifications is not going to address the larger IT strategic plan and IT strategic goals. They may assist us in that process, but right now this is for those managed services. So it is for our day-to-day tech support that we have that helps us, the help desk that we provide services for. They manage our server, the backup for us, and all of the day-to-day IT needs of the organization. It's not addressing that strategic plan. That will be another one that we have to put together as we move down that road.
And
Mr. Shackleton?
thank you, Madam Chair. My recollection is that in 2008, we brought in a colleague, a former manager, who provided kind of the strategic assistance to help us move into a space where we brought in an organization. I think Veracity was the first one. Pario. We've had a couple different managed service providers. This is a little beyond the scope of what they did, and we've had varying levels of engagement from our board with with this. And we did have a brief conversation, or maybe 2 or 3 brief conversations, earlier last year and the year prior. I think the desire to have a little more engagement with our board might be worthwhile. But we did at one point we did send out an RFQ and did execute an RFP process for some.
But that was for a study or a project. We're talking about regular relationships with the auditor, attorney, and engineer.
At the time,
And
President? Sorry.
I think that's what the law calls for, specifically.
Manager Shackleton?
I would like to reemphasize your point, because I think you're going down the right path. We actually did bring in organizations to help set up our back-end server. We shifted from one model to another, and then we went to a third. We've actually brought in organizations to do some pretty big back-end work that hasn't stuck over the years. And I think our staff will be able to, or more articulately than I, talk about a need to do some integration of our data sets and the way we manage our information. But I do think that it'd be worth re-engaging and giving us a better sense for direction and how the investment will actually benefit our organization. Because I think that's happened at a staff level, and just in my conversations over the last 6 months, I think they know how they want to leverage technology to the benefit of our organization. We don't have that buy-in at this point.
Mr. Heenan?
Chair White, managers. So there are 2 sort of separate issues that we're talking about here. One being the day-to-day information technology managed service provider, which is similar to our legal counsel or our engineering in the sense of they manage our whether it's our servers, our email operations, our daily help desk. We don't have internal IT presence in the organization, so they are who we respond to at any moment in time when there's an issue. Separate from that, and that's something that we do budget separate, you'll see an operations account. And most recently would have been discussed with the board, I believe, at an operations and policy committee, operations and programs committee, when Mr. Mant had recommended we move away from Imagine IT to corporate technologies prior to their contract actually expiring. And so this is now really building on corporate technologies. I don't know if we wanted to call it a probationary time, but they were brought on without this process because our previous service provider had not been doing work to the level that the district had anticipated. So we're now asking for proposals, assuming corporate technologies would be one, but we may see Apari or Veracity, some of the others we've had in the past who have fallen under this contract. The second contract would be for actual IT planning or specific project, specific project consulting services, and that's related to the information technology plan that the board has reviewed and that we're continuing to work on internally. So 2 separate, constructing whether it's a new database or information technology service versus this is the day-to-day operations and maintenance of the products and elements that the district owns and manages.
Thank you. Mr. Welch?
Everybody has added a piece that, in my experience in working on these contracts with some of the past operations managers and other staff, is adding a piece to the puzzle. And Mr. Heyman is correct that North Point Technologies has provided some GIS service, and as Manager Miller points out, that's a project. That's not an ongoing technical service. There has been a series of managed service providers who are meant to provide the backbone and the framework for the district's technology to continue to operate on a daily basis. Some of them have overpromised, have not worked out, and there's had to be changes. And Mike described the most recent one, which was Corporate Technologies, was brought in the late winter last year, and that did come before the Board of Managers and was approved, I think, in, I want to say, February. I don't have all the details of but there's been a series of managed service contracts. There was one full-blown RFQ process that I believe was in the spring of 2016, but don't quote me on that. So the process has been engaged in the past. It has not always resulted in a service provider that the district is stuck with for that time frame. To Manager Miller's point about these are qualitatively different services than the kind of advice and consulting services that you get from your engineer, from your legal. The statute says legal, professional, and technical services. So it does make a distinction and says that each of those are meant to be the subject of solicitation of letters of interest every 2 years. We, as I say, have interpreted that language broadly to say where you maintain a relationship over a period of time of 2 years or longer, you are best advised in hewing to your transparency and your management of the public weal to go ahead and put out letters of interest, and you can certainly be forthcoming with the wood service providers to say, we really, really want to change, or say, well, we're soliciting letters of interest, we just want to know who's out there. So there's some discretion as far as that goes. But if it's an ongoing contract, the purpose behind the statute is to just not have these service providers just keep getting renewed and renewed and renewed for years and years without some process whereby the board looks at it.
Thank you. Do you have a comment, Andrew Olson? So we have a motion and second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay?
No?
Manager Miller opposed. Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. Item 11.2, Resolution 18026. Mr. Heeman.
Good evening, Chair White, managers. There we go. Before you this evening with Resolution 18-026 for authorization to execute a contract with Wank Response Services for decommissioning and removal of refrigeration equipment at 325 Blake Road. A little bit of background on this particular request. We have two separate systems in the facility. There's an ammonia system and a brine system, or also known as the calcium chloride system. Mercury was discovered in the ammonia system after we had removed the liquid ammonia back in early February, and so we do know of a mercury issue present when they were trying to drain some oil from a mechanical system. Wank Response Services immediately responded to that incident to not only come up with a response plan, but also to properly dispose of the liquid mercury that had been released. Since that time, we've conducted a mercury audit at the facility, and that consisted of determining where mercury was throughout the entire ammonia system and all the pipes and mechanical components of the entire ammonia system. We also went and tested the ammonia that had been removed from the site, which was at an air gas facility in Chicago, to determine whether cross-contamination had occurred, which in this case it didn't. It came back as a non-detect. In addition, because the largest system of the two is actually the calcium chloride or the brine system, we also removed material from that system and had that tested, and it was found to contain heavy metals, zinc, chromium, and lead within that system at regulated levels. So there are essentially 4 phases that we're looking to do to remove this system. It's a little bit more complicated, I think, than we had anticipated when we originally began the process. In order to effectively remove the full refrigeration equipment and their systems, it requires us to do 2 separate tasks, essentially. So we can go in now, and you'll see we've broken it out within 4 proposals in your packet as well, just for ease of sort of identifying the step work. The first one being removing the ammonia piping and mechanical components to that system. Prior to being able to do that and include it in the proposal, you'll notice there's a process where we blow air through and actually vacuum out any mercury that remains in the system, manage that hazardous material. Then remove the piping via cutting, wrapping, staging it, which brings us to the second proposal, which is actually the transport and disposal of that. It's listed as a budgetary estimate in your packet and within this particular proposal, because at the time we complete staging and have it all on site, the cost will really be dictated by the work we're doing with the PCA right now in determining what the levels of mercury are that are acceptable for the various landfills we're looking at. So that number, the approximately 78,000, could go up or it could go down. And in my discussions with Wank Response Services, it's really sort of an unknown. We feel that number's pretty accurate if the test results come back the way that the audit had shown, so it's built off of the known components of the audit. The third step will be the brine system, which will be to filter the calcium chloride out of that brine and all the heavy metal out of that brine system through a dual filtration prior to us being able to release it into the sanitary sewer once it's essentially just water. And we're working with Met Council for all the permitting and elements associated with that. And finally, then removing that system, and that's the larger of the two systems, and that includes cutting all of the pipe. We know there's chromate and other potential heavy metals in the system, so again, needing to manage that in accordance with protocol, and that particular proposal includes transportation and disposal as well. So as I mentioned, the process is really removing everything with the completion of this process, leaving the facility ready for demolition and abatement. So there would be no other necessary removals. The facility we would be able to actually access the facility again. It's currently only accessible through Wank Response Services using the professional protective equipment that is necessary, at which point then we'll be able to access to provide tours and do salvage work and some of the other components that are in the facility that have sort of been on hold from that time. And I should note that all of the proposals do include permitting, removal, transportation, disposal, all of the reporting that's required. But that leads me to a couple of points. We're working with Wank Response Services. The nature of how quickly we've been trying to get these proposals together, there's a couple of areas that I've asked for clarification on, and I wanted to note to the board that we do have the resolution written with advice of counsel for that reason. We just want to tidy up some of the language regarding the compliance and regulatory components, the disposition of the filtered solids that will come from the brine solution, and making sure that we're adhering to all regulatory and compliance standards. And then there were just some discrepancies with the schedule and some of the labor hours. You may have noticed we had about 816 hours in 7 days. So there were just some typos. We want to clarify how many days it's going to take. But we will do that prior to executing any of the contracts. So the budget, as I noted, there's 4 steps. Moving through each one of those, the budgetary estimate being number 2, which is the piping, transport, and disposal. That one is built off of the audit, but it's the one that could be uncertain and may move up or down. Of course, we would be back before the board either way to let you know where we've landed. And so with that, the staff is recommending approval of Resolution 18-026, and we did include a 10% contingency within this approval that would allow the district administrator to go to a not to exceed in the event that there was some increase in that budgetary estimate that we could provide within that contingency. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
First, may I have a motion to approve the resolution?
So moved.
Adopt resolution. Motion and second, or motion, Rodman, second, Shackleton. I want to make a comment first, and then I'll let you. I want to thank you for not inviting us into the building until it's ready.
Jeez.
Andrew Shackleton.
You mentioned the disposal of the piping, and I know Hennepin County has begun to insert a recycling phase in the demolition of structures. Have we explored that at all?
Manager Shackleton, managers, we have, not with regard to this system because of the contamination. So we're looking at where we can dispose of, whether there's only 2 facilities that take mercury to a certain level. So we're seeing what we can bring to that versus what can go more locally. But regarding recycling and salvage and other materials, that is a component of the actual demolition services that we're looking at, where we are looking through what metal, scrap, salvage, sale we have, as well as how we can reuse any of the concrete or other components on site, whether it's to crush or the bituminous that we're going to bring. So that's something we're certainly looking at in the process.
Great, thank you.
Manager Miller.
This company is a division of Wink. Do we have all the liabilities covered as we would with Wink, or guaranteed by the parent corporation and everything?
Mr. Meehan's indicating yes.
Yes.
And it's broken into 3 separate proposals, and one of the proposals says that they will not include work in confined spaces. What's the definition of confined spaces?
Mr. Meehan.
With all the warnings that we've heard, I would consider the whole building confined space.
Pizza Luce as well?
I've never been in the building.
Pizza Luce.
Mr. Meehan, you're up.
Manager Miller, managers. Confined spaces is a regulatory term to define areas that are enclosed that you would need specific monitoring equipment to enter. As part of this project, we don't anticipate that any of the sites that will need to go in to take the piping out or any of the machinery would require confined spaces. The reason it's put in there is that there's additional materials and equipment that are needed to go enter the confined spaces. So how we put our estimates together is based on that we wouldn't need to as part of this decommissioning of the material.
Okay.
Other questions for Mr. Heyman? Manager
Do
Olson?
we have any idea how much mercury is there? Pounds, ounces?
Manager Olson, we don't have a set quantity or even an estimate. I do know in dealing with Wank Response Services that it would be classified as a fair amount. We're not sure at what point it was put into the system. We know it was put in likely to prevent corrosion, but we don't know if it was put in at more than one time and to what level. The release that occurred was very quick and it was turned off quickly, so we have an idea through the audit of all the low point areas where mercury is likely pooled, but they'll use that mercury vacuum to remove that.
Would that be considered a recyclable item?
Yes, Manager Olson, yes, it is. So we'll look to try to recycle liquid mercury as much as we can.
Thanks.
Any other questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Mr. Welch, do you want to add something? Thank you.
I just, as long as Mr. Meehan was there, Mike mentioned the regulatory compliance, that is specifically excluded from those scopes of work. Can
That's
you
correct.
speak to how that'll be addressed?
So as part of the document, we'll have to document and record all the materials, where they're handled, how they're disposed of, so essentially a chain of custody of all the material that'll go there. That'll be a part of our scope of work, is identifying with the mercury and the calcium chloride and heavy metals that are associated with that. All of that material will document and record where that goes, so that the proper, I guess, chain of custody is
Compliance
established.
records.
Yep.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Moving on to item, Resolution 18027, Mr. Heyman, authorization for the contract.
Chairway managers seeking authorization on 18027 to execute a contract with Wank Associates for demolition services for 325 Blake Road. A little bit of background where we are with this particular project. We started the investigation for a completion of an additional work plan, for additional investigation, excuse me, back in 2013. That's with regard to the no association determination and some of the environmental concerns we have on the site. Moving from there, we entered into a pre-demolition plan with Wank at that time to do some of the elements associated with safety, risk, liability, as we knew at one point in the future we would have a vacant site and be in need of tearing it down. With that pre-demolition work, moving into 2015, that's when we noted that there was asbestos at a pretty significant level within the facility. So we did do some additional asbestos testing at that time. We were unable to do all of the destructive testing necessary because we had tenants and an operational facility. Moving into 2017, we worked with Hennepin County and their ERF program to conduct the majority of additional environmental investigations that were required from that original work plan. And now through site vacancy at the end of 2018 and moving forward with decommission and the hazardous materials, the site will be prepared for demolition. So the contract in front of you this evening is really a phased approach. We've opted to break this long-term demolition contract out into sort of more discrete tasks rather than coming forward with a $2.5 million demolition contract and construction oversight and all of the various components. We've done so just to better manage our funding opportunities. There are a variety of funds out there that exist, whether it be with Met Council, Hennepin County, that we are chasing and seeking funding for. So this particular contract, the first is project coordination, and this is less related to the demolition itself, but an opportunity to make sure we have Wank continue to work on the Blake Road reconstruction components, the Lake Street diversion, which for instance is currently in active construction as of April 1st, and they're working on some of the redesign components with a manhole as part of that. Providing master development assistance when we have master developer on board, and then any grant initiatives associated with that. That task 1.0, is staff driven, and so none of those funds are dedicated or are committed to Wank We often work with Wank in this phase where we say we may need 2 grants, and we know it's about $5,000. If they were to step in, we will let you know if we need to work on that. Step 2 is a little bit different. It's specifically for demolition and abatement specifications. It includes the destructive testing of materials to finalize where we were with the pre-demolition plan. It includes all of the permitting and regulatory components with demolition, and develops all the plans and specifications for us to go out to bid, as well as complete the bid process and have a contract ready for demolition to commence. The budget with this particular contract is about $25,000 for task 1. Again, that's a staff directed on an as-needed basis. Task 2 is essentially a turnkey delivery of the final contractor. So we will, to Manager Shackleton's question earlier, it includes salvage and looking at, we do know we have a variety of shelves and large racking systems that are of value, and have heard from contractors that they're interested in potentially purchasing. So this will really bring it all the way from starting with plans and specifications through that bid process. The cost is $102,355, and we had suggested a 5% contingency in the event that there were any changes to the elements with that soft design. And I should note, what I failed to note actually in the decommission presentation is the removal of these systems is actually grant eligible under our TOD grant. It's considered demolition. So we do have grant funds that will assist with some of those tasks. This is considered soft costs, soft services, which are not grant eligible. Once we have a contractor on board, which this would deliver, those grant dollars then kick in again, whether it's for the demolition, which we've received funds for, or what we hope to have abatement dollars for asbestos abatement. So with that, staff is recommending approval of 18027 to contract with Blank Associates for demolition services.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt? Manager Olson, is there a second? Manager Shackleton, your question?
Question. In your summary, you talked about those the top grants, and you had a comment in there about asbestos not being accepted or approved so far. You're going after it again in May.
Correct.
Do we ever get to a point where if we do the work and then the grant is post the work that we don't qualify for it anymore?
Manager Olson, managers, we would not. So that is one of that's a really great question, and it sort of helps, I suppose, better describe the schedule associated with demolition. We're approaching this with an optimistic attitude that we're going to be successful in the May 1 round. You may recall we're shifting our focus from what was a TBRA grant through Met Council for Asbestos Abatement to what's a SEED grant, which is specific to areas of concentrated poverty where they're trying to promote redevelopment. We've been in discussions with Met Council to feel this site lines up really well with that program. It's a program that it's generally not too competitive in the sense of they're usually looking for projects. So we're optimistic that by going after those funds on May 1st, as well as the asbestos dollars that you may recall from our last board committee meeting, the asbestos dollars have come down, that we would be able to receive those funds within the summer timeframe to initiate demolition of the facility yet in summer into fall. If that doesn't occur, we are able to take down the portion of the building necessary. So we'll do a phased demolition, take down the portion that's necessary to allow for Blake Road to expand, and would be able to then chase additional outside funding sources with the facility still standing.
Great. Perfect. Thank you.
Would you remind me when they're going to start constructing the Blake Road, or at least our portion of it?
Yes, Chair White, managers, they will begin this summer. There's not a defined date yet. They actually just were reaching out to us. They just awarded the bid. I want to say it came in around $1 million under. So they had favorable bids. I'm not sure if they've accepted yet. They're still working through some condemnation hearings with right-of-way acquisition. They have a projected start time of July, but that may move out a little bit further. I know Xcel Energy would like to bury utilities in that July to August window, so we're actively working with them right now in coordinating that schedule.
Okay.
I just voted on Tuesday at the county board as well.
Would you say that again, please?
It was also voted on Tuesday at the county board.
Voted on?
Came out of the committees going towards board next week.
The ward.
Award contracts.
Okay. Anything else? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
I just want to comment on this project, tearing down a building of this magnitude with all the problems in it is really complicated. And you've really made it easy for us to make decisions on it, the way you've presented it, and got all these different agreements in place. And even the timely notice of the problems that have developed, it's really appreciated that way.
Thank you.
We don't feel like we're in the dark and at the will of some mistake happening that we'll read about in the paper.
And I did
my
come
goal.
in.
Thank you.
Well, I was able to come in last week and sign the easements and the maintenance agreements for those 3 parcels of Lake Road, so that was drawing the line under that piece.
Thank you.
Good work.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Welch?
it is indeed 120 days after the end of the fiscal year that the financial reports are due to the state.
Wow.
So we get to the end of April, more or less.
180 days, 6 months.
Oh, 80, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good to know.
But we've got obligations to our lenders
That are
earlier.
separate.
We have Eric's Field Stuff with Resolution 18-028 through 032.
Thank you, President White, managers. Here tonight seeking authorization to enter into agreements with our partners of Carver County, Lake Minnehaha Conservation District, City of Shorewood, Minneapolis Parks and Recreation Board through its Park District to provide cost share funds to their watercraft inspection programs that they operate in the district. I'll briefly provide a recap from the March 8th Operations Programs Committee and the background I provided at that meeting. Review the 2018 request from our partners and staff's recommendations for funding, and then next steps with the program funds. So our general approach to kind of AS prevention in the district has been through this cost share support for our partners in special programs. Early on, we evaluated more of a watershed-wide program and found it to be not very cost-effective. So we went to more of a lake-by-lake, partner-by-partner support, helping the partners build their programs while they build capacity to operate the programs. And through the district's strategic plan, AS activities were realigned to better refocus and align internal resources towards those higher priority activities. So the highest priority activity is more the management control of high impact species such as common carp. Example, that's the 6 Mile Halstead Bay Habitat Restoration project we're working on. Partner support for AS prevention efforts was more of a lesser priority. To provide some brief history on these funds, 2013 is when we really kind of ramped up the level of funding as our partners programs also began to ramp up. Through that time period of 2013 to 2017, we were having kind of a formula of providing 50% cost share of their program costs. Also through 2013 to 2016, the district also funded 100% of cost for inspections at 6 lakes that previously had no coverage. We discontinued the 100% funding at 2016 and 2017. Our partners applied for those lakes to be cost shared, and we cost shared those lakes as well. From 2017 to 2018, we reduced our funds from $175,000 to $122,000, and with the request we received for 2018, it would allow the district to provide about a 36% cost share of their program cost. So you can see the table of the requests we received from each of our partners. 2 of our partners did receive a $10,000 grant from Hennepin County, who does receive funding for AS prevention through the state legislative appropriated funds. So those eligible expenses are reduced by $10,000, bringing us just under our budget of $122,000, 2018. And then just continue with those funds, we'll be continuing to kind of monitor our partners' AS programs as well as determining our role in those programs and AS prevention in the district. There'll be opportunities to work through these through 2019 work plans as well as through the strategic action plan. With that, I can take any questions on this.
Is there a motion to approve, to adopt the resolution?
So moved.
Oh, I'm sorry, there are multiple resolutions. Could your motion include 130, 028 to 032?
So moved.
Is there a second? Manager Shackleton, second. Question, Manager Olson.
I'm looking at the LMCD with 25,000, and I'm looking at, or 35,000, and I'm looking at the city of Shorewood, 74,000. What is the city of Shorewood doing?
Yeah, so the City of Sherwood has a partnership with the Homeowners Association for funding. They hire a private firm to do inspections, but they're also offering, they do it from April through October, 7 days a week. From, I forget the exact hours, but it's during their park hours, which I believe is something like 5 or 6 a.m. through it's probably 8 or 9 p.m. And I know the wage through a private firm is more expensive than the agencies that hire their own seasonal employees.
So that's one lake
One lake, higher level service, private.
versus Minnehaha,
Yep.
there you get half the cost.
Correct. Well, the LMCD has typically contracted with Three Rivers Park District to utilize their seasonal staff to provide inspections. And I believe in your packet is a breakdown of the actual number of hours that are provided for each agency, so you can see that breakdown as well.
Okay.
Manager Shackleton.
The numbers do jump out, and I guess my question is, what kind of value are we getting from this? And the frame I'm using is, we have zebra mussels in Lake Harriet. Christmas Lake it's always a challenge, though there's just one launch. And looking at the program cost for LMCD versus Shorewood, how, and I would like to just acknowledge, I seconded the motion. I'm happy to vote for this, but what kind of bang for the buck are we getting?
Yeah, so I mean, we know inspections, at best they're slowing the spread of the AIS. They're not preventing it because, like you said, Harriet, it's been infested. 3 of the lakes with some of the, so-called most extensive inspection programs have been infested. At this point in time, we're working on ramping down our level of funding, but at a level that allows our partners to also kind of plan and build ahead of their capacity. Our partners still view the inspections as high value for their programs. They view it as kind of their best method to prevent the spread of AS at their boat launches. So there's a strong partnership component to our funding of showing that support through that aspect. So as we reduce funds, we have to be cognitive of the partnership aspect and think of a plan that meets both objectives for our partners and us as we continue through future years.
Other questions for Mr. Fieldset? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution 18-033, appointed Community Advisory Committee member. Ms. Shelter.
Madam Chair, managers, tonight before you is a request to appoint a citizen to the Minneapolis Park and Rec Board's Community Advisory Committee for the Minnehaha Parkway Regional Trail Master Plan. What I was going to pull up is a map of Minnehaha Creek Parkway Trail. It's also included in your packet. Essentially, it's all of the parklands along Minnehaha Creek from the city's western boundary all the way to just above Minnehaha Falls. Just some context for this request, around this time last year, the district, city, and park board executed a memorandum of understanding. So it's everything in that dark green along Minnehaha Creek. So last year on this time, the city, park board, and district executed an MOU, which recognized that if we were to integrate our land and water resource planning, we would be better at integrating goals and achieving the natural resources of all the agencies. So the request before you is a good example of that MOU in practice, having the park board reach out to us as they start kicking off their master planning effort for the creek and identifying that they're going to collaboratively work with us in the city to guide those decision making. Also, what they use is a very elaborate process to involve the community, and they use community advisory committees to influence and provide input throughout all of their master planning. So the park board approved the foundation and the framework for the CAC, and through that they've asked the Watershed District Board to appoint one of 19 members. So tonight before you, we have presented Richard Nyquist as the district's appointee, and how we came to that decision was the district has its own CAC, and so we thought it was in the best interest to see if any of our current CAC members were interested in serving in this capacity, since they have already been vetted through the Board of Managers and staff. So we asked some questions, why they're interested in serving, why they thought it was important for the district to be involved, and thought that those answers provided a good foundation and a representative of why the district could be represented. So tonight we are asking for approval of the district to appoint Richard Nyquist to serve on the Park Board's Community Advisory Committee for the Minnehaha Parkway Regional Trail Master Plan. And with that, I can take any questions.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 18033?
So moved.
Manager Becker, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognus, Manager Olson.
How long a term? Did I miss that?
Manager Olson, managers, it's not an exact term, it's just however long the master plan process takes. Their guess is like 12 to 24 months.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions, Manager Shackleton?
I recognize this is kind of a one-off, but if this is an example of the park board actually viewing us as partners, and they have CACs for a variety of planning purposes, it might be worth considering thinking through how we appoint CAC members, in that their processes do take oftentimes 2 years or longer, and our CACs members are appointed for 1 year.
1 year, right.
And often, their CACs sometimes seek specialists and sometimes don't. And it might just be worth us thinking through a process that's separate and distinct from just picking people that we already have, because we may not have the right pool of people on our CAC for other future CACs that the park board requests. So I still plan on voting for this, but I think that'd be worth considering kind of as a policy level.
Yep.
Good point, Manager Shackleton. Yeah, this is, in my recollection, the first time we've been asked.
Yeah.
So this is kind of an ad hoc
But it may
suggestion, but
become the new
yeah.
trend.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Ms. Schaufler? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Resolution 18-034, authorization to enter contract for vegetation maintenance of 4 sites. Laura Domjancic.
Good evening, managers. Tonight, staff is seeking authorization to enter into a contract for vegetation management at 4 sites throughout 2018. The district is currently managing vegetation at a total of 19 sites throughout the district, and those are managed under contracts that were executed in 2016, 2017, and also existing grant agreements with Great River Greening. At the end of 2018, all those contracts will expire, so all 23 sites will come into new contracts that will be quoted in the beginning of 2019, and we'll be working with our new project maintenance and land management staff to scope that work and identify efficiencies within those contracts. The first of the new four sites that we'll be managing is the Lake Town Wetland Restoration. At the end of 2017, initial vegetation establishment was completed at this site, and a district easement over the Hess property here will allow the district to manage vegetation in the wetlands, uplands, and woodland areas of the site. Ongoing management of the wetlands and buffers on the site is required as part of the wetland replacement plan, so this work will fulfill that obligation. The contractor will also be required to meet specific vegetation standards that are part of the wetland replacement plan. Second is a 6 Mile Marsh Prairie restoration. This site will actually be broadly managed by Great River Greening through a grant agreement that I'll speak to in my next presentation. But the grant agreement just covers the upland areas of the site. So this contract will cover management in, the site's wetlands, woodlands, and in 2 easement areas that we have on the property. And then the third site is the Long Lake Creek Wetland Restoration. This site reached the end of its warranty period establishment in 2017, and so under an easement with the City of Long Lake, the district will manage vegetation on that site in perpetuity. And then last is the Methodist Hospital Wetland Restoration. If you'll remember, in 2017, the district was granted an easement over this property, about 15 acres. That'll allow us to manage vegetation within the wetland restoration. This work will be focused on the southern portion of the site, and Methodist Hospital, Nicollet Health Services, will be managing the vegetation in the northern portion of the site where they conducted their floodplain mitigation last year. At the end of 2019, when that kind of establishment period is over, then the district will also be working in the northern portion of the site. The district requested quotes and received 3 from those contractors, and Applied Ecological Services provided the low and responsive quote of $29,365. Staff is seeking authorization to enter into a contract with Applied Ecological Services for $29,365 and to establish a project maintenance budget in the not to exceed amount of $32,202 and to authorize the district administrator to authorize change orders up to that amount. Take any questions you have.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 18034?
So moved.
Manager Robbins, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Shackleton. Are there questions for Mr. Tomjanovich? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
And then, as I mentioned, staff is also seeking authorization to execute a grant agreement with Great River Greening for vegetation management and resources at Mile Marsh Prairie restoration. In 2016, the district and Great River Greening partnered to apply for an LCCMR grant for investigating the impact of haying to remove excess soil nitrogen from a site which is connected to the abundance of weedy species and can also be connected to the abundance of native species and also pollinator habitat and diversity. 6 Mile Marsh Prairie was chosen as a pilot site to test these ecological relationships, and the proposal was successful, and Great River Greening has received an appropriation of $111,900 for this project. The grassland areas of the site will be divided into 12 3 to 4 acre plots, and then each of those plots will receive one of 3 treatments, either haying, prescribed burning, or a control that will be spot herbicide application receives just to manage any sort of weedy invasion. Each plot will also be seeded with a high diversity seed mix so that we can measure what sort of response the various treatments are having. So soil nitrogen testing, a plant survey, and also pollinator survey will be done pre-treatment. And then those surveys will also be done at the end of treatment to determine if there's been any resulting success. The agreement obligates the district to contribute up to 19% of the cost of the work, up to a not to exceed amount of $25,000. Staff requests authorization to execute the agreement with Great River Greening to perform vegetation management and research at the 6 Mile Marsh Prairie and to supply the local cost share element for the work not to exceed $25,000.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt?
Move approval.
Manager Miller, second. Manager Olson, Manager Shackleton.
Can you refresh my memory what hang means? Because I have something in my mind, and I don't know that we have the same thing in mind.
Sure, Manager Shackleton, managers probably do have the same thing in mind. So Great River Greening will contract with a local farmer to hay the certain plots of the property, so mowing and taking that material off of the site. Whereas typically our management scheme has been either prescribed burning or mowing, where the material is left on site to decay. But taking that material off takes the nitrogen off of the site, so hopefully reducing any sort of nitrogen effects in the soil. So yes, cutting, baling,
No, it's exactly what
taking
I
it
was
off.
Can you just explain the theory?
Sure.
Because in my mind, I understand the theory of why we would have naturalize something and allow it to, and I understand the theory of burning, but harvesting.
Sure, certainly. So the thought is, because this is former agricultural land, that there are high nitrogen levels in the soil due to impacts of agriculture, and that's led to certain areas being weedier than others. So the thought behind the haying is if the soil nitrogen is taken up through plant material, there's nitrogen in the plant material. If you're taking that off, cutting it, removing it off the site, then you're effectively taking the nitrogen off the site.
Is hay a bit more effective at removing nitrogen from soil than other products, or is it just there's a market
That's what we
for
hope
it?
to determine with the soil nitrogen testing, yeah. So the prior to treatment, Great River Grading will contract for soil testing, determine nitrogen levels, and then following. So we'll try to determine if it is an effective treatment. It's not something we've done on any of our other project sites, so it'll be interesting to see if it's
But is it actually, like, is it shown to be a better remover of nitrogen from soil than other products?
They're not planting hay, they're just cutting it and removing it as you would hay. Cutting the
Kind of
weeds.
prairie, oh, I misunderstood there.
Yes.
Okay.
It's how you
Yep,
Yep.
manage what's already there.
it's what they do in ditches in the rest of Minnesota.
There you go.
Any other questions?
We're not planting corn.
I know what you were saying. You thought they were really experimenting out there.
You want to remove nitrogen?
So we have a position on Representative Drazkowski's bill.
We talked so long that there's another question. Manager Becker.
Is the reason we want to do this research because of the high cost of burning relative to haying?
Manager Becker, managers, no. My understanding is the thought behind the research and kind of the questions behind the research are if haying is a more effective treatment for managing these sites that are perennially weedy. I would say by comparison, haying will probably be more costly than prescribed burning. Our contractors kind of have that system very much dialed in and can burn a pretty large site fairly inexpensively. In this case, we'll have to, or Great River Grading will contract with a local farmer to come in with his equipment and hay these plots. And so I imagine that'll probably end up being, maybe in labor more costly. In some cases, I know that prairie hay is very desirable because it has low weed content. So it's possible the farmer may be able to sell the hay for a cost benefit. But I haven't seen any quotes come in, whether it'll be kind of a break-even type thing for Great River Grading to contract with someone, or there's some sort of profit to be made.
Thank you for indulging my curiosity.
Sure, I'm curious too. It'll be interesting to see.
Any other questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
I went out last fall, one of those very, very hot days. It was one of the 50th anniversary events and collected seed out there, and that was really fun. But we had to be instructed as which weeds and which things we wanted to propagate. It was very fun. And we will move staff update ahead of the closed session. Ms. Schaufler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to either provide an update at the end of the PPC meeting, but since time didn't allow, I just wanted to provide the board an update on last night's South Minneapolis community meeting. And then there's also a Star Tribune article that came out today that Telly had sent on to all the Board of Managers. So last night I attended a community meeting at the Nokomis Center. There was about 100 people there. And it was a meeting that was set up by Joan Sohold and Jerry Mullen. They're just local citizens around there in coordination with Representative Wagenius. And how it was advertised to folks was that they were inviting the USGS to come talk and see if there was any interest in having them lead the study of what's going on with the groundwater issues around Lake Nokomis. So some notable people there was Representative Wagenius, Representative Torres Ray, Minneapolis Council members Jeremy Schrader and Andrew Johnson were also there. And then the USGS led their speech. His name was Perry Jones. They offered a good presentation, talked about how they could offer an unbiased approach because they don't have any regulatory authority or sort of any management requirements, whereas the Watershed does, the DNR does, the city does. And talked about their White Bear Lake example. They studied that extensively and helped inform what was ultimately going on there. But did note that it's quite different. That's a very small system. It's just one simple watershed. This is a very interconnected watershed. The lakes are all connected for the creek, so it's much more dynamic things going on. And the main things that the USGS hit home on was 2 things are needed if they're going to become involved. One is clarity on what is actually being asked, because as the meeting unfolded, there was a variety of different agenda items I think people had for the area, and then also needed to find funding. So that's kind of the main sticking points for them. And then after they gave their presentation, they opened it up to questions. There's a variety of questions asked. But then people started to focus on how the USGS could assist them and how they could actually get them on board. So the main thing was, again, focusing on funding and clarity around what needed to be addressed. And they suggested, going to the legislature, their legislatures, to help get resources. And that's when Representative Torres Reyes spoke up and stated that this is her #1 priority, but they are facing challenges among their peers to get support. And the city said that they could be supportive of a partnership as well. And then after there was a lot of questions from the citizens, Representative Ogenia spoke up and said the DNR is taking the lead, which was kind of news to me, and I think a lot of people in the room, because we just heard about why the USGS should take in the lead, so it was a little bit confusing, and just said that they're trying to scope the problem and decide how much money it's going to cost to do this study, and she had noted that the city didn't have the capacity, the same capacity the DNR does, so it makes sense for the DNR to do it, and she estimated about $500,000 would be needed to do the study. Then after she spoke, Dan Lace from the DNR was in the audience as well. He got up and spoke, tried to clarify what they are doing, which is trying to scope what the groundwater issue is and trying to investigate the existing data through the wells that they have, and that there's a lot of unknowns, and the knowns are what's going on above the ground. We have good data on that. So he said there's a lot of gaps that need to be filled, and he had just noted some upcoming meetings taking place, and again, reemphasized the same thing the USGS did, which is there needs to be clarity on what the ask is. So he also noted that the Watershed City and Park Board have all been active partners and are trying to put everyone's heads together to figure out what's going on. And then after that, Representative Ogenius reiterated that she wants the DNR to take the lead, and acknowledged that the USGS has been important in helping with the White Bear Lake system, and that was kind of the conclusion of the presentation. So some interesting things. I spoke with some of the USGS staff afterwards and was curious on what has happened with White Bear Lake in recent years, given the high precipitation we've had, and they've said that it's almost fully recovered from all of the record precipitation. So they were just kind of stating, despite all groundwater pumping and this and that, when you have the kind of precipitation we've been having, that kind of mutes all of that and just becomes the main factor in all these things. So then this afternoon, Eric Roper of the Star Tribune reached out to Tully and myself, and I reached out to the city to make sure we were coordinating on the same message and everything was good there. And he just wanted to know a bit more about the dam. So we offered why the dam was installed in the first place. The city had flooding. Your petition to install the dam. How it's been helpful to prevent flooding, especially the last several years during record precipitation. He also asked for the district's perspective on if it's a record precipitation issue or a local, what he called like man-made problem, and I just reiterated it's not just a city of Minneapolis issue. We're seeing this across our whole watershed with high water issues, in undeveloped areas to the city of Minneapolis, and in talking with other colleagues, it's a statewide issue. It's not just a city of Minneapolis issue. So I said, our perspective is the precipitation, and then also just noted for him that we are part of this bigger coalition of all the agencies working together. So that's the conclusion of that Star Tribune article. It's supposed to be updated. I think it was updated tonight and then maybe again tomorrow.
I just did it 20 minutes ago.
Okay. So just some notes for you, for the board, for some upcoming meetings. So on Monday, we're meeting with the DNR folks, Katrina Kessler from the city and Michael Schroeder of the Park Board, and I'm stepping in for James since he's out, to just discuss higher level roles and responsibility of each agencies and trying to set higher level political messaging to help inform what this technical group of staff is doing. And then that technical group of staff, which I'll also be involved in, is meeting next Friday, March 30th. And then, unrelated but related, because everything in South Minneapolis is now related, I am hosting 2 community meetings to kick off our FEMA repair projects ahead of our board, requesting the board to order those at the end of April. So on Thursday, April 12th, which I recognize as a board meeting date, is our first meeting, and that will be at the Nokomis Community Center. And then on Tuesday, April 17th, it'll be the same exact meeting, just at Lyndhurst Park. And we're limited on open available nights, so we unfortunately had to pick a board meeting night. But there'll be identical meetings, so people can come to either or. And we're calling it a kind of a kickoff meeting, so we're going to inform people about the FEMA repairs, about the park board's master planning, and about the city's Southwest Harriet project, everything that's going on. So people can choose what's their interest in, or all 3.
Thank you. Manager Shackleton.
I might skip our board meeting to attend that meeting, because if there's something down in Nokomis immediately following what just happened last night, and I think the Nokomis Hiawatha CAC is starting, I think they're starting soon, if not this week, next week. It'd be good to just have some additional eyes in the meeting too.
Manager Shelcombe, you're welcome to do that. Our intention in talking with Park Board and city staff was, this happens every time we host community meetings, people come in with things unrelated, and we can kind of guide them down how to get in touch with folks regarding that issue, but we're here to talk about this agenda item, so.
And please don't misinterpret my
No.
saying that and likewise for the board, as any sense of mistrust in our staff, or frankly, the city or the park board staff, because I've seen the 3 agencies coordinate to wrangle challenging meetings into something that's a positive outcome. But I also think it'd be good to have a policymaker present because of just the partisan politics that's kind of at play right now.
Yeah, we just enjoy having board of managers come to those meetings, so it's always helpful.
Is there a geographic line being drawn around what is being looked at?
For the groundwater issue or FEMA?
Groundwater.
Groundwater right now is basically from Lake Hiawatha south to Taft Lake. And that's all kind of it's Taft Lake drain, the Lake Nokomis sub-watershed starts from Mother Lake, drains through Taft, through Solomon Park into Lake Nokomis. But then Hiawatha is being brought into it because of the golf course pumping issue, as people are trying to make a connection there.
Okay.
Even though it's a different sub-watershed.
So, if I understand you right, they've described the immediate groundwater aquifer.
Manager Becker, they're trying to figure out if they have enough data. So there's some deep well data, but there's not a lot of more shallower ground level data. And the Park Board and City just installed a well last fall. So there's some data gathering to be done to help fill the gaps. And the intention of our meeting next Friday at the technical staff is everyone's bringing together information that they have to try to start to fill in some of those gaps and develop a plan of what additional data we do need.
So rather than being a hydraulic line that describes the project, it's a political hydraulic line.
Becoming right now.
And the residents are also pulling in the airport's commission because the MAC has shifted where their snow storage happens from someplace else on site to the northwest corner, which is near the intersection of 77 and Crosstown. And so the residents have said, they pointed to some of the improvements that happened at Legion and at Taft. They're pointing to the snow storage, and they're saying these are man-made issues. And again, base level data is just not there.
So the main message that the USGS gave was if they were to get involved, it's going to be 2 to 5 years before there's answers. So, you know, the citizens want an answer tomorrow. So unfortunately, that's kind of not how it works, but.
2 to 5?
Manager Miller.
In the article, it mentions sinkholes. Is that what, like they have in Florida?
Manager Miller, so yeah, sinkhole sounds a bit dramatic. So there's just naturally around Lake Nokomis, especially around where we have our stormwater ponds, there's always natural settling. It's a wetland. There has been some little bit bigger depressions around some like sanitary sewer lines and stuff, where you have actual infrastructure, and then when the land's settling, it makes it more of an obvious depression.
And people mention that the water is seeping up through their basement. In my neighborhood, they just put sump pumps in. And that seems to take care of the problem. Would that be a solution for some of this?
Manager Miller, yeah, I think you know, sump pumps or just waterproofing basements could be an option. I think the other thing that's causing what initially started and brought people's attention to this was people's lateral sewer lines were failing actively on like blocks at a time, and those are usually related to high groundwater issues. So on top of people watering in their basement, then there's sewer lines. So the money's starting to add up, and that's where I think you're getting a lot of people's attention.
In our neighborhood, we got water mains breaking all over. 28 mains broke this winter. It was the major street mains. And, you know, they're on top of hills and valleys and everything else. It's nothing to do with water level, unless it's, so there's this weather is causing, I suppose this global warming is causing a lot of problems that we're not used to. You know, these huge rains and then these strange winters where you got thaws and freezing and thaws and freezing. It's causing a lot of problems with the public works, especially underground. So I'm wondering how unique this problem is to Nokomis versus the whole rest of the watershed.
Yeah, Manager Miller, I mean, I think, as I said earlier, we know we're having these issues across the whole watershed. Just from if you're looking at a surface level, you know, you can look at our 2016, 2017 monitoring data, and lake levels are high and they sustain being high in 2017 despite lower precipitation. But maybe Mr. Meehan can speak more to the.
Well, on top of Manager Miller, managers, on top of just water levels being a concern, aging infrastructure is a big issue. I mean, a lot of these are old sewer lines that we're seeing just break down over time. And so identifying how they're breaking, what they're breaking, I don't think it's clearly known, but there's some correlation that they're assuming it's tied to that. So they break water, like you said, water mains break all the time. They break because pipes get old, you have corrosion issues, or something happens along those lines. So, yeah.
And I'm sorry for dragging this on.
Manager Shackleton, you are not. You want to say this.
But, I mean, to be fair to the residents, like the city of Minneapolis replaced the sewer main, and by virtue of that, replaced the road in the spring of, what year is this? I think it was the spring of 17, or maybe it was the spring of 16. And by that fall, there was a, what do you call it? Sinkhole. Thank you. There was a sinkhole on that road, and so they had to go back in and do spot repairs to the water main and the bituminous. And separate from that, the park board made a budget decision to not mow with full extent on a grassy area right next to Lake Nokomis, and it was just wet enough that cattails started popping up where there had been turf grass. And so if you live there and you see this construction happening, and you know that there's high water because you're dealing with it, and now there are cattails where there used to be, where your kid used to fly a kite, as is mentioned in the article, you don't know what's going on. There's not an easy answer, and it's different agencies and even operating in different plans, and so it's complicated.
Thank you for your update
Yeah.
and also for staying on top of this,
Yeah.
as we know, very complicated.
Certainly
issue.
I know James has provided thorough updates and kind of keep everyone up to date because there's just a lot of moving pieces. The last thing I just wanted to add was with all of this, I know James provided an update at last board meeting about potential Lake Minnetonka levels. So we took a lake level reading yesterday, and then it's all estimated because there's still a couple feet of ice, if you're guessing your ice out date. But yesterday it was around 928.81, so with about another inch of water left in the snowpack, that still puts us under that 929 mark, which is a good place to be for this time of year. But we keep track of it weekly, keep checking with the National Weather Service, just if anything is going to change. The biggest unknown is always that big spring precipitation events, so.
Okay.
To that effect, are the logs still in?
Yeah, Manager Olson.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Sorry.
We keep those in until the ice is out, so they.
But I thought we had water around the dam already. We still have ice right up to the dam?
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, so it fills up to those.
Okay, so without the bubblers, it stays
Yep.
pretty frozen? Wow.
So yeah, we're trying to determine if we need to be proactive like we were in 2011 and get the bubblers out, and so that's what we're kind of actively keep
Very
checking.
effective back then. But I
Yeah.
don't know that we have the same sense of urgency because it's up to that.
Yeah, the snowpack isn't
Okay.
really the same.
Thank you.
The Lyndhurst meeting is on April 17th,
Yep, Tuesday, April 17th,
at
and it's from
7,
6 to 8.
6 to 8.
And we'll be sending out, the park board is taking the lead on kind of drafting all the communications, so we're hoping to get everything out by next Thursday, so make sure the board gets those notifications.
All right. Well, thanks to all staff.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Meehan. We will now go into a closed session for a discussion of the deed unemployment compensation matter. Do I need a motion?
The basis for the
Should we turn
going
off
into
the-
closed session, in this case, is attorney-client privilege, as Manager White will note.
Such a true joy. As soon as you do a catch-up, it's supposed to put it out. Is that what I was seeing?
We are back in open session. The meeting is
Finally did it in
adjourned.
quarter